Hello, everybody. EJ Schultz here, news editor at Ad Age, and welcome back for our August edition of Purpose Marketing Hits and Misses. Joining me is our regular guest, Thomas Kolster. Welcome, Thomas. Thomas,
Thank you, EJ. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Let me give you a proper introduction. You are the founder and creative director at Copenhagen-based Goodvertising agency, which advises companies and organizations on how to turn environmental, societal, and health risks into market opportunities. The reason you are joining us for this episode, as usual, is you are a purpose marketing expert. But we realize there are lots of experts watching us today. I want to welcome our live audience and encourage everyone to weigh in as you see things you like, you dislike, if you disagree with us, if you agree with us. We want to hear from you, and we'll try to respond as much as possible. So let's get started today. Our first campaign features Samuel L. Jackson, who is dropping some F-bombs on behalf of European energy company Vattenfall. The effort comes from DDB Nord, which promotes Vattenfall's wind energy by having the actor pitch seaweed grown at wind farms. Let's take a look.
Motherfucking wind farms. Loud, ugly, harmful to nature. Who says that? These giants are standing tall against fossil fuels, rising up out of the ocean like a middle finger to CO2. Deep beneath the waves, they can become artificial reefs, creating habitats for sea life to grow. These are wind farm seaweed snacks made with seaweed grown at a Vattenfall wind farm. Serious gourmet shit! So, what's it gonna be? Motherfucking wind farms or motherfucking wind farms?
All right, Thomas, is this a hit or a miss?
Wow, I would say that is a fucking hit, right? And I think when it comes to all of this, I think aren't we all the experts? I mean, our moms, our dads. So I'm really curious to see how people feel about this one. But there's just like three things that I think they get right. First of all, the spokesperson. I think too often you choose the generic spokesperson who you already align with climate issues. So it's just so great to see Samuel L. Jackson, who sort of can bridge that climate divide. So choosing a spokesperson that speaks more broadly to people, I absolutely love that. I do love facing criticism heads on. It's not something you can just wipe underneath the carpet and think it's not there. So starting off with saying, a lot of people don't agree with wind farms, I think is a very honest and great approach to dealing with some of these quite divisive topics. And lastly, the reframing. I think reframing something as freedom, I think, again, is something that appeals to a lot of people. I think quite often climate becomes a thing that speaks to a certain type of group. I think a lot of Americans, a lot of people around the world, I think can connect with the word freedom. So I think they get these three things really, really right. And it's just a refreshing little piece of advertising for something as often boring as windmills, let's be honest.
So I want to challenge you on one thing because I looked this up. They actually grow the seaweed on, lines in the water suspended between the buoys, that it's sort of part of the wind farm structure. But that actual snack product is not for sale. So I know in the past you have not liked things that could be considered gimmicks. Wouldn't this be a gimmick or no? Do you think that the messaging overrides all that?
I do like the criticism and take that criticism in there. I kind of agree with you. It's almost like the chips is sort of coming in between the message. I didn't take that too seriously, rather than just as a proof that there's so many wonderful things that can come out of wind farms. I just took that as a sort of proof of evidence. If that was sort of driver of the narrative, I would have said too gimmicky. So you're right. Most often I'm pretty hard against these gimmicks. I think it's not the driver of the narrative.
Okay, we did. You have at least one person watching that agrees with you. Saya on LinkedIn says, "I think it is a win." So let's move on. Our next campaign comes from European auto brand Skoda and FCB London. They sought a creative solution to handle the often X-rated graffiti that litters the track of the Women's Tour de France. We'll put the video on screen so everyone can see sort of exactly what this is about. You can see, though, that they actually are doing this to promote the race by converting the very phallic artwork into something a little more appeasing, as you can see there. So what was your take on this one, Thomas?
You know, EJ, I'm just still surprised that I stopped doing those kind of drawings when I was 5 or 10. I can't imagine that you still have grown-up people running around doing that stuff. I think there's a couple of things to it that I really do like. Obviously, we have seen across many, many different sports, soccer, football, we covered before, where obviously the men's sports are dominating. So I think it's a brilliant idea to use the media at the men's to drive people to be curious about the women's race. So I talked about this before, but the media placement is just so key to a lot of this. What is the right time and place where people are most likely to act on the message? So I really love the media placement. I do also really love this sort of tongue-in-cheek way of turning something negative into something positive. It's kind of like how I behave a little bit in the traffic. So when people give me like a if you when I'm moving around in traffic, I kind of want to return with like, I love you, because it sort of disarms people. So I think this campaign really does these two things really cleverly.
Yeah, and I want to kind of learn more about why this has been a custom. But apparently in the past, they've actually had to go out and like erase this graffiti like before the race. So now they're obviously taking a little more artful approach and getting a sponsor involved as well. So I think it got a fair amount of free media as well, which of course is always a win when brands do this kind of stuff.
It's brave, right? I mean, I don't think a lot of brands want to be connected with those types of symbols. So, and I agree with you. If there's any French people watching this show, please enlighten us on why are people running around and drawing this stuff. I would love to know. And
also, feel free to weigh in and anything we're talking about. We want to hear from you guys and get your questions or comments or anything. Moving on to our next one comes from Instagram. This is a pretty big campaign. We wrote about it at Ad Age. The Meta-owned platform is trying to address the fear that some people have in putting their creations out for the world to see. This campaign was actually timed with the release of new tools, such as using so-called trial reels that you can actually share your Instagram stories or posts with non-followers first to kind of see what the reaction is before you then share them with your friends. The campaign is from Uncommon Creative, and it uses multiple celebrities, including Tyler, the creator. Let's take a look.
I'm Trinity, and I'm born and raised in the Bronx. So my biggest thing is I seek validation from other people. Whether it's trying to impress my friends or posting stuff online, like, what if I put myself out there and people don't like it? But I like it, though.
You just answered everything you just said. Like, I like it so much that folks won't change how I feel about it. It's just that feeling inside where you just like, I know what I need to do, and you cannot lose that spark.
But I feel like in real life, it's hard to really not care what people think, like, you know.
You have to be the trailblazer. You have to be the one to go west for the goal. But also leaving a bit of grace in there for yourself to mess up. You gotta be okay with looking crazy. Always put you first. Because at the end of the day, when you in the room by yourself, do you like it?
I post on my story, I be rewatching my story like, I hit that.
And you never know who's looking. You never know who is looking.
So, can a social media company get away with a message around self-confidence? What's your opinion?
I'm really, really curious to hear what everybody thinks about this one. Kudos for launching this little tool. I think that's a clever tool. I buy into the insight that a lot of people feel insecure about posting their content. So that's that, build on a strong insight. But coming from Meta, the mother company of Instagram, I think it's incredibly tone deaf, especially in 2025, when they have loosened a lot of their policies around moderation, around gender. And that, for me, seems, just not right that they're doing that. So yeah, they say, maybe try that. I think before you try putting stuff out like this, maybe get your house in order first. So I really just don't buy into the premise. I think they try and be authentic with the target group. But I think, at least in my opinion, it's a big fail.
So it seems like your criticism is not necessarily the piece of advertising itself, but the company that's attempting to send this message, that there's a disconnect, you think?
Yeah, but that's the thing about impact and sustainability and purpose, right? That, before we could only look at the tip of the iceberg and we could say, is this a great story? But we have to look underneath all of that stuff, underneath water level. And I think, unfortunately, had they not pulled back on the policies in 2025, this exact year, I would have bought into the ad word. I think a lot of us also remember back in 2021, there was a report that came out, a little leaked document that came out that in fact 2 out of 3 women on Instagram do actually feel insecure, feel trapped. So even that thing, taking that into perspective, I could have forgiven them for that. But if they hadn't made the policy changes this year, I could have said, it's a nicely executed piece of work, but I just don't think that it lands well. And I think everybody who has seen what they've been doing the last year won't buy into this.
We did have some comments on this one. Tim says everything was great except the brand it's coming from. Jessica says this is a brand play, not a purpose one. That's our own Jessica Wall. Hello, Jessica. We can debate that one some more later to see what other comments come in, but let's move on. Our next one comes from the French telecom Orange, which, along with Publicis Conceal, traces the historical struggles of the French women's national soccer team as it sought to gain recognition. Let's watch this.
À premier abord, on se dit, oh, le football, c'est pas un sport pour les filles.
Et si je ne joue pas au foot, il y a quelque chose qui manque en moi.
Parce que ces demoiselles veulent jouer, on ne peut pas les empêcher.
Vous pensez pouvoir devenir légal de footballeur masculin?
On est aussi forte qu'un homme, pourquoi pas?
Équipe de France. Porter le code, c'est émotif, je crois.
Je sens que j'ai le football dans la peau.
Vous pensez que c'est compatible de jouer au football et de garder sa féminité?
Bien sûr, on n'a pas l'air féminine.
Pourquoi ne pas rentrer à la maison faire le ménage? C'est un sport dur pour des jambes de jeunes filles. Ce n'est quand même pas un sport qui est fait pour les femmes.
On voudrait qu'arrête cette misogynie. On veut faire de la femme sportive un sexe symbole.
Aujourd'hui, le haut niveau, c'est s'entraîner tous les jours. Aller travailler, enchaîner avec un entraînement de haut niveau le soir, ça fait des grosses journées. Aujourd'hui, j'ai la chance de signer un contrat pro. J'ai pas le choix, je dois réussir.
So, of course, there's been no shortage of marketing around women's sports in the last few years. And actually, Orange last year was behind the the deep fake ad to promote women's soccer that actually won a Grand Prix. A lot of people watching probably recall that. So did this ad live up to that standard?
I think, yeah, exactly. I think we might even have covered that. I can't remember if we actually covered that in one of the earlier episodes. You know, I'm curious to think what people feel about this ad. You know, Orange has been a supporter of football for a long period of time, 27 years, and a lot of the major league stuff, I think, since 2018. And so kudos for the consistency, truly. I just couldn't help feel that in some ways it ended up being a little bit too much about Orange. I don't know how I kind of felt that they were taking almost credit for that long, hard fight that women's football had been facing. So maybe that was me being a little bit too critical today, but that was sort of the sentiment I left with. I really like the positive notion of sometimes looking back in history and actually realizing the long way that women's soccer have come, even though there's still such a long way to go. My niece plays professional women's soccer, so I see that personally, how difficult it is. But that's just what I was left with. But I'm curious to see what the audience feels about this. Yeah, it's also as before when we talked about Apple. It's when you're playing on such a high creative level, and when you deliver on that each and every time. I think when something falls a little bit short from that, maybe I become more critical. If it hadn't been Orange, I would probably have forgiven them for that.
We do have a few people that might disagree with you. Darcy says a great use of mixed media animation, damn near perfect. And then Saya says this was executed very well. Loved the timeline. It was quite informative, actually. I will say to your point on the kind of the corporate involvement here and putting the brand out there, I think part of the story in women's sport is Ben getting more sponsors to spend behind it. So perhaps they could feel good about, saying, hey, we've been there for a while. Maybe it's not totally out of place, but anyway, lots to talk about with that one. Again, we could come back to it if anyone else wants to weigh in later. Let's move on to our next one, though. It comes from the French home improvement chain, Leroy Merlin, and it's meant to offer an environmentally friendly lawn mowing solution in response to a French lawn mowing ban that I think was put in place to try to overcome, to try to deal with, I think, noise pollution and some other things during certain times of the day. This effort comes from BETC Full Six, and it involves using sheep to take care of the lawn. Let's take a look. All right, so we had wind farming earlier. Now I guess we have lawn farming. But they actually partnered with an organization called Green Sheep on this one, which is an eco-grazing specialist. And I looked this up. This is a real service. So you actually, I think, have a shepherd that comes to your lawn that does some consulting, may put in a fence if you need one, and then off you go. Maybe you don't have to use the lawnmower ever again. I'm not sure how practical all this is, but what's your take on it?
I think sheeps as functioning lawnmowers came to my attention the first time with the LA celebrities. I think that's the first time I ever heard about that service. So that was apparently a thing that celebrities were using. In some ways, I do really like when you turn an environmental thing into something that's a convenience, a benefit. So now actually you can lawn your mown between those hours. I think it's the afternoon when you're not allowed to do it. So there's like a convenience benefit to it that I really like. The second thing that you also mentioned, EJ, that it's a partnership. And I think especially when it comes to purpose and sustainability, there's a lot that can be won from partnerships. You don't actually need always to be handling everything yourself. It might actually make this more legitimate when you do that. So I do actually really like the alternative. They give you another choice in that situation. What I don't like, but I'll give them a little bit of a benefit of a doubt. But what I don't like is that they are still selling fossil fuel powered lawnmowers. And in this day and age where we all have a power plug and we could go electric, I think that is a fine line to be walking. So I do hope that they will be following this up with strict policies and maybe even banning the fossil fuel lawnmowers, because if we look forward a year, 2 years from now, and they haven't done it, I think this is close to being greenwashing. But I like the initiative. It's practical. It's done through a partnership.
So you do think it's practical? To me, it seems like a lot of work to mow the lawn.
Yeah, in this day and age where you have robot lawnmowers, you have other people slowing your lawn. I mean, I have a little boy. Would he love to see a little sheep running around there grazing in our garden? I think he would absolutely love that. Yeah. But it maybe also shows how far we sometimes go. Why not just buy an electric?
I forgot to mention they call it Plan B. It's pronounced Plan B. So there you go. That's a very bad impersonation of a sheep on my part.
Yeah.
All right, we're already to our last ad, and it comes again, Skoda making another appearance in this episode. This ad that we're going to look at, though, is a lot more product focused. It's set in a very gossipy neighborhood. Let's take a watch. It comes from Leo, UK.
Electric.
He thinks they're part of a cult.
I bet they bought the car with crypto.
Probably got a podcast about kale.
Mom, the tree huggers.
What?
Millennials.
Jeffrey reckons they wear sandals. Hang on a minute. They're coming now, they're coming now.
There he is. Never seem nice.
They seem all right.
Skoda.
All right, so this ad obviously is meant to normalize EVs and say that they're just not for tree huggers. What did you think?
So as I said in the earlier ad with Vattenfall, I do generally really love when brands dare to face the challenge and the criticism heads on. I think they do this. What I'm just doubting with this is that, and this has more to do with the fact that when we look at a lot of sustainability issues and social issues, these things are constantly moving. When you kind of think that you're almost there on LGBTQ, it's a plus. So these things are constantly moving. What was greenwashing one day is not greenwashing, or the other way around. I kind of feel that they're trying to normalize a thing that is already normalized. 1 in 5 cars sold in the UK are an electric. So it's almost like they're trying to chase ghosts that are not there. And I think that's my problem with them. So it's almost like it has the reverse effect of what they're trying to achieve. They're in fact almost recognizing or saying that these stereotypes still persist out there. So I think they're helping people stay with those biases. And I know it's, I know that maybe not everybody agrees with me, but at least that was the sentiment I felt with this particular ad. If it had run 5, 7, 8 years ago when EVs weren't as normal, we see them everywhere on the streets in the UK, it would have done well. I just don't think this should have been an ad in 2025.
I agree with you on that point, actually, because I liked the ad as just a standalone ad. I thought it was funny,
100%.
well done, but then it's the strategy. And I looked at it from more of a U.S. point of view. Obviously, Skoda's not sold here, but we're not quite as normal EVs in the U.S. They've had a hard time taking off lately, especially. But it's not because people don't think that they're normal. Mostly, it's because they think they're too expensive or they're worried about range anxiety. Those are like the two biggest consistent hurdles for EVs that show up in poll after poll. I don't think anyone thinks these are crazy things anymore. So yeah, the strategy seems a bit off here.
Yeah, and I think it's a shame, right? Because look at even a brand like Tesla. I think a lot of people thinking about the economic aspect, resale value, and a lot of these things. So it just does seem out of touch. And I know that in some episodes earlier, we did, I think it was your Hyundai ad that also talked about green hugging, and it's just a shame that it just seems to be reinforcing those myths rather than dispelling them. I don't think we need to dispel those. I think we need to dispel the myth about resale value, price, and all of that stuff, range anxiety, as you say.
So we did have some folks that tend to agree with you. One viewer says, love the humorous element to this advert. However, I'm confused because electric cars are not a taboo, at least amongst my circles. And then another person, Peter, says he likes the humor, which I agree with. I thought it was nice, kind of wry humor and nicely done there. In a case like this, I do wonder, it's like kind of hard to blame the agency because I'm assuming this was the brief. They delivered on the brief pretty well, but it's like, where did the brand, that Skoda must have seen some data to suggest they still need to kind of spread this message. If I were interviewing, that's what I would ask, but unfortunately they're not on the show with us. But maybe if someone knows the brand can weigh in later and let us know. We did have some folks back to the Instagram ad, if we have a little bit of time. Darcy says, again, we're talking again about the Instagram ad from earlier, says, nostalgia of authenticity, very boring and overdone. Also the message of you deserve validation, but only through our platform feels greedy. That's a good point. And then Peter said, and there's so much research on how damaging social media is for everyone's health. On that point, I wanted to ask you, Thomas, like clearly that's like an issue with Instagram. So do they just ignore it? What's your advice? I mean, you consult with companies, like if it's on that point, like how should they handle that?
I think my issue, and that's why I really love to see the Instagram ad in connection with the Skoda ad and the Vattenfall ad, because the two others did try and face that criticism heads on. That's been a lot of criticism around windmills. We can say, yes, there are still some myths around driving an EV. And saying and acknowledging that is probably the first way of getting over that hurdle. I think when I watched the Instagram ad, it almost made me like a little bit angry.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like they just ignored the last 5 years that for a lot of people have been painful. I'm on the platform as well. I mean, so are my brother's daughters, etc. And I think when the report came out in 2011, that was already bad. And then connected with the policy change. And I think this is where we as agencies and advisors need to be much better at coming back to the client and say, let's not be tone deaf for this. Let's acknowledge that this happened and that's absolutely fine, and let's move on. And as I said in the opening, I do acknowledge that they created this little feedback loop tool. I think that's actually like quite a great idea. It's a little bit of a product innovation they try and put in there, but then rather acknowledge that there's a lot of challenges with the platform. That's why we keep innovating. I would love to have heard that story rather than what Darcy said, some sort of nostalgia of authenticity, which seems more inauthentic.
I presume that communication is in part of the campaign elsewhere, maybe more on the performance side or something, rather than the big brand film like this. But you're right; they could have at least nodded to that. Hey, we're making changes. We hear you, kind of situation, rather than this sort of Pollyanna kind of message, right?
Yeah, and also because they choose this very sort of intimate focus group type setting that really gives you that feeling that you're a fly on the wall, and for me that makes it even more creepy. So yeah, it's seldom that I see an ad that kind of almost make me cringe and be like, damn, why are you guys doing that? It's almost making it worse, right?
All right, we're going to have to leave on that negative note. But Thomas, thank you again for joining us today. We'll be back in September for our next live episode of Purpose Marketing Hits and Misses. Again, this is EJ Schultz. Want to thank Thomas Kolster of Good Advertising Agency, and a special shout out to our producer, Lauren Ciardio. And thanks most especially to everyone that tuned in today. Keep your comments coming. Feel free to still weigh in on our social channels on LinkedIn, and let's keep the conversation going. And we'll see you next month. And just a quick reminder, you can watch all these ads again. We'll have a summary post up on adage.com in the coming days. So thanks again, everyone. We'll catch you next time.